Hi, and welcome to the Fourth U Dimension podcast. My name is Ember Kelly, and I'm the Director of Religious Education at Fourth Universalist Society in the city of New York. This podcast in particular is part of our Getting the Message series, which is a series where we reflect on the reflections, where we take our Sunday messages and just dive a little deeper into them. On our podcast format, which you can find on SoundCloud and Spotify, you can listen to the message itself. On our YouTube videos, you can watch the message as a separate video, but glad to have you join us on either of our platforms. And we look forward to discussing the message from November 29th, which is The Spirit of Play, which was shared with us by Olas Carayannis, who is here with us today to talk about their message. Glad to have you with us.
Hi. So happy to be here.
Let's take a little moment to reflect on this together. So once again, Olas, thank you for joining us. And I just found this as the director of religious education, the person most commonly seen as interacting a lot with the children. I found this to be a really interesting topic to cover. I'm kind of curious, where did the inspiration for doing a message about play come from?
Yeah. This is my first podcast. I'm so excited to be on. Um, but I think that the notion, the spirit of play, really the inspiration came from this time period of there's so many serious things going on with the pandemic, with the elections, and there's this sense that sometimes just playing and doing something joyful or doing something that makes us feel good, connects with others, playing a board game, whatever, can be like an indulgence, but not something to be celebrated in and of itself, like kind of like something that maybe even can generate guilt within us when there's so much seriousness going on. And so the reflection really was, the inspiration really was like, oh no, that's really valuable to play. It's really important to feel joy. It's actually what we want for all people. Like part of our work in this world is that all people can feel joy and laughter and ease and calm. So by practicing those things that bring that to us, we're actually doing important work. And it's not something to just feel like, oh, that was good, I snuck away and did that, but the real important work's over here.
Right, definitely. As a parent that I homeschool, we homeschool both of our children right now, especially with the pandemic. But we put together all these big lessons and have our game plan figured out. But one of the biggest areas of learning, and we make sure to like plan ahead that we're going to have lots of playtime and free time included, because this time for play is the time where like kids discover and do so much of their learning. And even as adults, we've internalize this belief that we shouldn't. But for adults, having that time to spend with ourselves, to spend thinking about things while maybe doing something we enjoy, or working on a project or playing a game, like these are all moments where we can better process life for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, along with that, it's as you're saying, it's a huge part of like learning for adults too. I think often we think that adults like learn differently, or like a lecture series is the best way to learn how to like use tools or something, right? But when really it gets down to it, we play with the tools, we try to screw this in, unbolt this, like whatever it is that we're doing with some sort of activity. Um, and that's part of the learning is playing around with it, seeing what the limits are to the objects that we're using. So
Right, maybe instead of a podcast, I need to figure out how to have like an interactive video game reflection for for each message.
I love it. Yes. Well, yeah, and speaking of video games, I think video games are actually another one of those things where they can help us explore the world, help us understand the limits of the world, and be teaching tools as well as things to play with. So
Right, definitely. I mean, video games have entered more of the cultural zeitgeist nowadays, but I know as a kid, it was very much still in the nerdy and frowned upon. But like as I look back at some of these games that I was playing, I played a lot of like RPGs and JRPGs, Japanese RPGs for those who don't know. I played a lot of these like Final Fantasy and Chrono Cross, and as I look back at these games now as an adult, these games were dealing with like these huge themes about like the meaning of life, identity, life and death, and like this, I was basically reading a whole novel in video game form. And yeah, there's room for seeing video games as a place where adults and kids can grow a little bit.
Absolutely. I think that we've accepted up to a certain extent, like movies and television as being art and things that can inform our moral and intellectual development. And video games are right along in that. And just like with anything, there are video games that aren't good. There are movies that aren't good, but there are also these video games that are high art, that are engaging, that are intellectual, and that are informative of our moral characters. So
definitely. So there's a line that just particularly caught my attention. It was talking about parents as like this connection between the past and the future. But even as we chatted briefly before starting recording the podcast, one of my thoughts was that even kind of the process of growing up is this weird, disconnect between the past and the future, that we want to learn from others, but we want to do our own thing. Um, how did that kind of theme inform your message?
yeah, the quote was from Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, who was
Slightly
a
well known.
well known in some circles. He was actually a Presbyterian minister too, and he kind of saw his ministry, the education of children, and the sort of giving children a space where they could be themselves, where they could express themselves freely and be accepted in that. And to that effect, he really tried to hold that space for children to explore their development, that past to the future, and become who they are. It makes me think a little bit of the William Wordsworth poem, where he says, the child becomes the father of the man. Now, outside of the gendered language of our British Romantic poets, this sense that our child, in some ways, our childhood is something that's always with us. It's always informing us into our adulthood, and in some ways, it is parenting us, as well as being that thing that is in the past, that is something we've left behind. So, yeah.
Makes me think about like those inner child meditations, but I figure that is a whole other podcast for a different day. So what are some ways, it's something that I think about as the director of religious education a lot. uh, how do we better listen to children, like both in our community but also just in our daily lives? How do we better acknowledge and listen to children?
I mean, it's such a hard question, and I would definitely not say that I was an expert in this field at all. But I do think, just from my observations and my memories, is one, entering into the world of children, like entering into the kind of rules that their play is creating, not trying to hold on to the external viewpoint. And also just taking them very seriously. Children are very complex emotional beings that pick up on a lot more than we recognize, and process things in ways that are strange and kind of magical, in ways that we ourselves maybe wouldn't think of processing it. But I think those things are important, but also just getting in touch with that sense of play in yourself, like allowing yourself to express that in any way that feels like right to you. It could be playing a board game with friends, or playing a video game, or skipping rope, or any of these things. I used to skateboard like my brother, and every now and again I try to go out and skateboard again. I'm much older and not as limber as I was before, but it does bring me that back to that place where the world was something for me to use in a new way.
I I can admit to myself, I suppose, and admit to the public, I guess, when sharing this, that about a little bit over a year ago, when we were living in Vietnam, I developed the obsession with I'm gonna get a skateboard for my birthday with my birthday money, and I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna like commute with it. Like I'm gonna like ride a little bit on the Vietnamese roads, and then I'll catch a bike for like the rest of the way. And needless to say, yeah, it didn't really quite turn out. It's definitely maybe that slightly more nostalgic feeling than an actual acting. And sometimes that even happens with like video games or books that we enjoyed as kids or movies that they can provide us that sense of things that we enjoyed as kids. So I guess a final closing kind of question would be, what are some practical ways both that you've done it, but also maybe that others can do it, for letting play into our own lives? Like you mentioned skateboarding. What are some other ways we can do that?
Yeah, so I read children's books out loud to my wife at night. It's a fun way to engage. They're usually easy stories to read out loud and to hear, to listen to, because they're not as complicated maybe as like an adult novel or something. They don't require as much focus, and they usually kind of are on one theme, so it's an easier thing to manage. You know, um, Films, all the things I was talking about before, watching films. I love any of the Peter Pan series of stories and movies, and this idea that childhood is something that does exist in us always, through the ways that we play with each other and things like that. I, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear also how you play.
Right, well, I was gonna say, like I think one of the takeaways, both as I prepared my time for all ages and as I listened to the message, that I think as adults we like block fun from our lives, like like you mentioned earlier in the podcast. I think it was that we very much like say like we like segmented it off. And like I think about maybe how I even like schedule, like, oh, this is when I can have my free time and I can do the things I want to do. And I'm working on spreading that out a little bit more throughout the day and being more flexible about that. I think that just making sure that we allow that space for us to have fun, even in such like a hard year, and even in whatever challenges we face, like we're gonna function better if we're able to have that downtime, have that playtime, have that fun, even as adults. Um, uh, I think I have it a little bit easy with two very active kids that are always wanting to play, um, both of whom seem to have a passion for video games as well. So I'm celebrating that a little bit. um, but so I get lots of opportunity there, and it's just always a good reminder too. I was thinking about when you were talking about the unique ways that the kids process things. My son, my oldest, he is very big on his imaginary friends, and as a grown up, like there's times that I'm like, okay, I don't need to hear about these imaginary friends again, or I don't need to know that Shark Boy and Lava Girl don't want to eat their food. um, Trademark required there on that one. um, but then it makes me think about how as a kid, like I loved like coming up with new imaginary friends, and like so it is good to be around kids to kind of help us stay young in our own thinking, I think, too.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that it can become that we can get ourselves into two different loops. One where we go out and do something that's fun and that's joyful and playful, and then feel guilty about it afterwards, like I should have been so serious in doing something. But also this other side of being like, oh, I feel so guilty, I haven't done anything fun, or I really should be more of a fun person or something like that. And I think that really taking care of ourselves in that sense of just giving ourselves a little bit of grace of, sometimes life feels so overwhelmingly stressful, and you're not in a place where you're going to honestly play, and that's like okay for a period, or where it's what you need to do. You got to drop everything, you got to stop doing the work that you're doing, and you got to go have some fun, and that's important too, and that's okay.
Right? And sometimes boring fun is okay too. Things that we might find fun maybe aren't for everybody, but we can still celebrate them, I think. um, Whether that's knitting and embroidery, or reading, or watching certain types of movies that maybe others don't quite enjoy. It's okay to find the things that work for you. Yeah, I think that You know, I'm really happy that this message really gave us a chance as a community to step back from the seriousness for a moment. So thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast slash YouTube video.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And thanks to Fourth U. It felt really good coming back. I've been away for a little bit. It is my home congregation. I've been away for a little bit because I am field work interning with another congregation for this towards ministry. But it's so good just to be back at Fourth U and to see everyone and hear Sean's great music and to spend this time with you, Ember. So thank you.
And thank you to all of our listeners, whether you're listening on the podcast or the YouTube videos. It's wonderful having you all with us. And, you know, I don't want to sound like too much of a YouTuber, but, you know, like, subscribe, leave comments to let us know that you listened. We love getting to hear from you.